You're listening to Power Plug Radio, home of your throwback jams.
Yes. Welcome to the Political Hour. I'm Mario Summers. I am your host, and you know why we're here. We're going to talk about national politics, state politics, not much going on the local level, and want to continue this Black History Month conversation that was promised. We'll try and end each show with just a little bit of details, maybe a story we didn't know, or perhaps a new invention. We'll get creative with it as we go throughout the year. But for now, we're just gonna kind of pick up where we left off last week on that conversation. But before we get into that, in the first part of the show, I want to talk about politics that are happening right now that are relevant, because it's some crazy times we're living in. We have a war brewing. Everyone knows that. If you're watching TV or you're going out in the grocery store, I'm sure everyone in our country has had some type of access to the fact that this is happening, because we've all been impacted. But here we are, 3 months into 2022. We have that going on. We have some pretty crazy laws being passed and legislated on in Tallahassee still. Our legislators are still in session, so we'll keep talking about some of those bills to look out for. And we're just in this affordability crisis right now. We were just kind of talking about it here in the studio before the show goes up. War is coming. Prices are going up. You have the supply chain that's now vulnerable and weakened. Not to mention the impact that COVID is having on these same factors at the same time. So here we are, where gas is more expensive, groceries, the basic day-to-day things, all the way to like housing. We got several local organizations, Faith in Florida, the St. Pete Tenants Union, and I don't want to leave anyone out, but there are more organizations involved as well, talking about the affordable housing crisis. A lot of our local elected officials are holding important panels and discussions and bringing in experts, and we're doing everything that the moment requires to pay attention to how expensive it is to live. I think we can do more, but I just want to kind of tilt my hat to the people who are working towards the affordable housing crisis that we are seeing in the city. But even the cost of services, is going up. So let's talk about this stuff, man. National politics. I do want to start with the Russian-Ukraine conflict that is happening in Eastern Europe. I want to start by saying I was wrong. But not totally wrong. And because I predicted that this wouldn't escalate. My thoughts about this is that this war didn't make sense. But I think for the United States, it still doesn't make sense to get deeply involved in. So I'll talk about that in a second. But it's a tragic situation, I want to say, first and foremost. And our thoughts and prayers should definitely be with all of the victims, because we, as American citizens in my lifetime, have seen and felt what it's like to be victimized by an attack in your home, in your area. And we leaned heavily on the Obama administration when we found out about the use of drones and how many death bombs we were randomly dropping on funerals and schools. And so we've been on both sides of it. And that's why I want to say that, it's a tragic situation. But the politics around it, it's interesting because humans aren't 100% predictable. We see it not on this scale, not like on this large warlike scale. We see it on like an entertainment scale a lot of times in America. You'll have somebody you did not expect to have that type of athletic or singing talent. Maybe their physical appearance or size doesn't make you think that they'd be able to do something incredible or do something. And so some things that we witness up close, I'm saying that to say, are unpredictable, right? Who's going to win this game? You can say this high percentage, but there can always be a chance for an upset. Politics is very similar. You can predict and have all the best predictions. Remember the Hillary campaign against Donald Trump the first time around, 2016 elections? They bought out this grand ballroom, the biggest ballroom, beautiful decorations and ceiling, because it was predicted on so many levels that this was going to be some kind of win. And, it was an upset. It was an upset to those in the political realm, for sure. Maybe not to the scientists who do the numbers. And that was another interesting thing is the polling people and those who are like, have their doctorate in like political, analyzing and so forth. If you talk to many of them, they said it was kind of predicted, but that's neither here nor there. What we're talking about is, why is Russia invading the Ukraine? Why is this happening? Well, I think they've been wanting to do this. I remember when I was in high school, graduated Lakewood High School, 2009, go Spartans. And there was some like gas conflict going on. And I had a Ukrainian classmate, shout out to Artur. And he was, I don't remember the details, but I remember him being like vividly like impacted, like this was something that he was taking close to heart. So, and then they invaded in 2014. They invaded the Ukraine, and, it did not turn into a full blown war. So do I think I was right about the leftover Soviet feelings? Yes, I do think I was right about that. But I don't think this is Russia's attempt to like bring back global communism. I don't think communism is at the heart of it, because global capitalism and the international economy, all of the countries are participating right now. And so the first thing we did was put sanctions on Russia. Sanctions are just penalties, right? That the world community agrees to against a country. It's not our first time using sanctions. Sanctions were used in South Africa from the United States to stop the apartheid. So we've used sanctions on Middle Eastern nations, and we've used them before. And so here we are having sanctions against Russia that are like mainly economic and cutting off their access to the World Bank, the World Banks, the major international World Banks. It looks to cripple and kind of freeze their economy, because so much of the trade and communism that happens at these levels of wealthy nations like ours and Russia and China and most European nations it happens in that global atmosphere. And so if the rest of the world agrees not to trade with you, it is only so long before the Russian people are going to feel the brunt of that. So I do think this is about power. Remember, the United States, our country, is the world hegemony. Like, we are the world's big dog, for lack of better terms. We're not the world's leaders. We're not the world's police. There's nothing out there that gives the United States any more legitimacy than any of the other recognized nations by the United Nations. But we have the most power and influence with this level of wealth. Like, we may not be respected everywhere, but we are revered everywhere, and feared, either revered or feared, we're not beloved everywhere. We have some enemies, and you can look through our history and see kind of why that is. But America had at one point in time a grip on this entire globe, enough to save the world from being invaded by other nations, so to speak, enough to introduce democracy and communism into new nations. I mean, and we did it in the name of freedom for so long, right? But now you have the other nations of the world feeling emboldened and feeling like, hey, okay, you can be America, but we can also be China, and we can also be Russia. And you're not the only one, America, who can get out here on an international scale and do what you want, especially after spending 2 decades in the Middle East in the name of peace and freedom. We're allowed to. And if you listen to any of the rhetoric from the Russian regime, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about freeing the real Ukrainian people from the tyranny of this oppressive government. Like, that's their narrative. And so I just think we're living in this time where I said China. So, okay, if China wants Taiwan and Hong Kong to ditch their democratic, drabs and go be along this one China, the People's China Republic, well, when the time comes for them to make those decisions, they're going to make them. And they're going to make them swiftly. They're going to make them out loud. Just like the South China Sea. China's out there not adhering to the international laws of the maritime laws that say how much of the sea you're entitled to based on where your coastal position is. China just took over the whole sea from all of those smaller countries. And there's nothing anyone can really say, because who are we to stop them from doing that? If you look at our history, who are we to stop them? And I think Russia has some of that same semblance. I think, their business with Ukraine is not our prerogative in their minds. That's between them and the Ukraine. And I think President Putin has made that clear as well, that that's how he's thinking about this. If people try to invade or interfere with this, there are going to be consequences like you've never seen. This is what he's telling the global community. And so what they want to do with these weaker nations is what they're going to do to these weaker nations. And if they want to invade and they want to violate the Geneva Accords and just kind of reestablish this culture of conquesting different lands and imperialism in the 2022, if they want to go back to that time, I think their logic is, who are we to stop them? So the validity in that question is why I don't think I was totally wrong. I don't think the U.S. is going to get knee deep in this war, because who are we to stop them? Beyond NATO and the United Nations and the organizations that we're involved in with other nations, I don't think on an individual level the United States would get involved in this war unless there is an attack on U.S. troops somewhere around the globe or on U.S. soil, or unless Russia just gets out of hand and not only starts with the Ukraine, but then looks to continue, like I said, bringing back this system of system of conquest and trying to take over other nations, or starting to really attack other nations if they start to show signs of aggression and dropping bombs with other nations. I think the U.S. would feel more inclined to get involved. But beyond that, hopefully we don't see a big shipment of our troops. I think so far we've been there to provide aid and not combat. And this is not our fight. The Biden administration, they just got us out of the Middle East after 20 years. With everything we have going on in this country, this administration does not need to get into another war without an end game. And I don't think they'll do it, but I'm not right about everything. I just told you, you can't predict everything with politics. Speaking of the Biden administration, I want to talk about, the Supreme Court really quickly, before we take a quick break. But the Supreme Court, the Biden administration nominated Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to the Supreme Court of the United States, making her the first Black woman to have such a prestigious nomination. I don't want to over or understate the significance as a Black woman myself. I don't want to understate the significance of achievements like Kamala Harris, achievements like Ketanji Brown Jackson. This is something that it's never been the reality for little Black girls up until like my generation. And even when I was a little Black girl, this wasn't the reality. There were Black men making their strides and pushing to become the first, but a Black woman, no, like it wasn't on the radar. So the fact that this generation is actually growing up, this generation of youth is actually growing up and living in these times, it is profound. I'm proud of the progress our country continues to make in such short amount of time. And you can say it's not progress, but hear me out, right? So Justice Breyer retired. These Supreme Court justices have lifetime appointments. They are the only parts of the government that have lifetime appointments. And Biden had the opportunity to appoint Judge Brown Jackson because he retired. Remember, RGB, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She passed away during the Trump administration. Just a phenomenal woman. God rest her soul. But during his last short time in office, he was able to confirm Justice Amy Coney Barrett. So Breyer, I think, wanted to retire rather than risk another conservative leaning justice on the board or on the Supreme Court, which is important. It's important because the courts are nonpartisan, but they do interpret the law through lenses that are either traditional or progressive. So you have the traditional thinking people, they look with original interpretation, whereas the progressive thinking people, they look at it whereas like the Constitution is a living document, and as people evolve, as times change, our Constitution must adapt. But there are some people who say, no, the Constitution was written like it was written for a reason, and it needs to stay that way. And I believe that the U.S. original Supreme Court interpretations, they look at minorities as second-class citizens. They look at women as second-class citizens. They look at the poor as second-class citizens. A lot of these rulings through the traditional or original interpretation lens are harmful to minorities, women, and the poor. And it just so happens that the people who think like that often align with the types of conservatives that put them into office, that recommend them. And so it's scary when you have a Supreme Court that is stacked too far right or too far left, because it takes out the nonpartisan aspect of the court, if that makes sense. So I'm glad to learn of Judge Brown Jackson's nomination. I think we're going to have some laws here in Florida that need to be challenged, at the federal level. If you remember, we talked about the anti-riot bill and how that got struck down at the federal level. That is the importance of having representation that, has a I guess developing and progressing outlook on our Constitution, our values, how the law should be shaped. You don't want to be trying to challenge a state law in federal court that is just gonna accept it like they did a lot of these slave laws and so forth. But we'll talk about that towards the end of the show. We'll talk about some state politics when we get back. I want to just touch on a couple of these bills that they are flirting with in Tallahassee. We are living in scary, scary times, but never fear. Us who want to fight the good fight are here. So I am Mario Summers. This is the Political Hour. We're going to take a break, enjoy some tunes, enjoy some music, and I'm going to get some water, and I'll be back in a little bit.
You're listening to Power Plug Radio, home of your throwback jams. listening to Power Plug Radio. Home of your throwback jams.
All right. Welcome back to the Political Hour. I'm Ariel Summers, and I am so happy that you joined me for the second half of this show where we talk about state, local, national politics, and hopefully at the end of our Black History segment of the night. So in the first part, we talked about my wrongness in this prediction that this Russian-Ukraine situation will escalate. So if you missed the first part, be sure to tune in from the beginning here on Power Plug Radio. Make sure you subscribe as well. And shout out to the other programs and everything they got going on here. All right. So we were talking about, I was talking about what I'm hoping our courts are able to do to handle some of these new laws that are coming up in the state of Florida. Our country has this weird trend happening in southern states where as our democracy on so many levels seems to be progressing. I just kind of shouted out Kamala Harris and Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson and how we're making these strides, but on so many state government levels, us, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, with their voting laws, we seem to be going backwards. And that should be troubling to all of us. But here we are. I think, first of all, this individual freedoms bill, House Bill 7, that's the main one that I'm hoping gets the most attention and the most legal challenges. Well, obviously, I don't want to compare apples to oranges because they're certainly trying to take away a woman's right to choose, or at least reduce it significantly, and a lot of other nasty things. So I don't want to say that, but to me, this is most pressing. This bill, so-called the Individual Freedoms Bill, House Bill 7, looks to revise the requirements for teaching African American history. It's right there on myfloridaLegislature.gov. Or just type in your Google House Bill 7 Florida and look at the language in this bill. It should make all of us want to, every black person, every ally of black people, every organization that claims to work towards equity and inclusion, all of those who created the George Floyd guilty money funds. Everybody should object to this terrible, terrible bill. It looks to revise the requirements for teaching African American history. They're trying to whitewash history, folks. At least the teaching of it. Look up on YouTube. We're here on YouTube. After the show, after the shows that you want to watch, or put it on your to listen list, right? Look up this video called Daughters of the Confederacy. It can't be more than 7 minutes, 9 minutes long or something like that. Daughters of the Confederacy. And learn about this group of women who worked in the South after the Civil War to give the guidelines on how to educate about the Civil War. Look up. They did exactly what I fear this bill will achieve in the state of Florida. They glorified the South in the Civil War. They glorified Southern history. They glorified Confederacy. They are a big reason why so many people today still rock Confederate flags. Because you would think, man, that junk happened in literally 1861 to 1865. It happened so long ago. You would think it would have died out like so many other American symbols that came, that appeared, that used to be, that are no longer. You would think that would die out. Why didn't it die out? Because these women in the early 1900s. And remember, I'm born in 1990, so the early 1900s for me is nothing but my granddaddy's daddy. That's not that far back for me. It's not that far back for any of us. And so they were able to glorify the South in the Civil War. They taught this curriculum of heritage and not hate, even though they were uplifting. They're the reason so many monuments of former Confederates exist around the South. They were so effective that if you talk to some people even today, but if you look in the historical side of it, so many people were convinced that the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery, that it wasn't about slavery. You listen to these folks talk, it wasn't about slavery. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was about the economic impact that this system had. It's about the system of power that the system gave. All right. It was taught. It was taught that way. That this wasn't about slavery, and it's why we still have some racist or kind of bigoted thinking people that still exist because of the education they inherited from their I remember being in high school and first realizing this, or college, early on, and first realizing this and saying, man, we know what your granddaddies taught you. I was like really mad about it, because here you had this whole organization that retaught history and people inherited. So that's what I fear about this bill. 70 or 80 years from now, they'll say Martin Luther King was fighting for peace. Listen to him. He was fighting for peace. They're gonna change the whole narrative and dilute any racial struggle that actually existed. So we have to be relentless on teaching Black history. We have to be relentless on these folks trying to silence Black history. That's not the only bill. There's another bill, House Bill 57, looks to prohibit racial and sexual discrimination training. Look it up. I'm not lying. House Bill 7, House Bill 57. But this bill 57 suggests terminating contracts with those who have that type of training or those types of values. Come on. They're hitting you with the purse strings. So if you have a contract with the state of Florida, if the state of Florida is one of your larger contracts, well, none of their employees could be told anything about racial or sexual discrimination, or they're going to terminate your contract. It's terrible. It's terrible. So that's what I mean by some of the scary bills we have. I talked a little bit about House Bill 11, the provoking, impeding, harassing officers. It sounds noble. I feel like Republican jargon always does. That's what they've mastered, and that's what we as Democrats have to begin to understand and outwork, out-strategize, out-organize. They've mastered making things that are bad sound good. And how? It's very simple. Provoking, impeding, or harassing officers. Of course we don't want that. But they've hidden all kind of terrible consequences in for those who may simply just be trying to record some injustice. So the anti-protest bill, we talked about that. That was ruled unconstitutional last September by a federal judge. It was blocked from becoming law. I'm hoping this, especially in the cases where it's like you're filming an officer and the officer says back up. Now you can face charges if you continue to stand there and film. Think about the person who filmed Alton Sterling being like beat up by the police and then shot and killed on camera. What's stopping the police from saying, "Oh, you're impeding"? Any police misconduct. Now, obviously, we need to respect our law enforcement. Like, I have family that works in law enforcement, and I'll be very honest that it is tough work. And not every officer is there to try and bring, the perpetuation of the system down on people. Here in St. Pete, I think compared to the surrounding areas here in Florida, I think we have some real progressive police. I've been in some situations where I've seen people who should have faced some consequences or who could have faced some consequences, and our police kind of work with them or try to calm them down, or, took the time to have some type of compassion, some type of human compassion. So, I say that to say I'm not against people treating police officers with respect, right? If someone is provoking an officer in a dangerous manner, then yeah, like, that's not okay. But I know we've all seen the videos of like the people, the British soldiers in the UK who like stand there and like don't even flinch, and people do all kind of funny stuff in front of them or whatever. Well, here in America, we got something called the First Amendment, and it allows us to say what we want to say. And I've seen police officers get gone off on because we can say what we want to say. It's our country. We're citizens. We're entitled to those rights. But those rights are not applied evenly, right? You have a certain class and race of people who can get away with that. And I think under this law, the class of people who cannot get away with that will be charged for provoking an officer or harassing an officer. It just is too ambiguous. Anyhow, that's what I'm worried about with that, is its ambiguity, the high profile nature of police killings that have striked outrage in this nation, and people who have filmed those things possibly facing persecution. It's going to discourage people from filming the police if that's how this is used. So hopefully we can see this language challenged. Some more fun bills to be afraid of, keep you up at night. Well, there are hundreds more. So many of them won't pass into law just because, we can't have hundreds of changes to our like laws in the state every year. But it doesn't mean that they won't be back. It doesn't mean that they won't keep trying. Like they've been trying to get abortion and a woman's right to choose taken out of this state for sessions and sessions now, but now it's finally seeing some daylight. So anyhow, I hate the energy of Tallahassee. I'll be honest. The Republicans, if you watch the live sessions, they don't even bother explaining themselves for controversial bills. All you have are brave Democratic elected officials making passionate pleas against these laws with no Republican involvement in the public side of government. I think it's cowardly, and they do it because they have the majority. So if you know you're gonna win something, why not just sit back, lean against the ropes, let the other party tire itself out? You don't gotta throw any punches because you know you're gonna win. You can kick up and relax your feet because you know you have the numbers, and we talk about it so often on this show, the disproportionate nature of our state legislature, how the state senators who are Republican grossly outnumber those who are Democrats, how the House members who are Republicans grossly outnumber those who are Democrats. So any laws they want to pass, they pass. When their majority leaders agree on things like House Bill 7, House Bill 11, there's no stopping these things from passing. There's no legitimate debate about it either. And that's the part that I don't like. I'm all about, you know, not winning every battle. But when you don't even have the guts to explain to the citizens of Florida why, the logic behind these decisions that are going to affect so many people, I hate it. I really hate it. So we need to vote them out this year. They need to get out of here. Starting with our governor, man. Let's get that guy going. So there's not much local history. I do want to spend these last few minutes talking about some black history. So last show we kind of got up to where we end at. I think we ended right around like the American Revolution time, and how black soldiers were fighting on both sides, but you had more black soldiers fighting for the British than you did for the U.S. side of things, because they were convinced that the Brits had their better interest in mind, that they would really give them what they were promising them. The South wasn't even promising anything. We weren't even allowed to fight in the South at first. So, you know, there's a lot of underground history there, but I want to talk now about this gap between the American Revolution and the Civil War. So that's like 1776 to about 1861, 1865, sometime in between there. Just I want to point out a few things that I found interesting from that period as it relates to how our nation is formed. Slavery was in this nation's DNA when it was ratified. When the Constitution was signed in 1776, and we talked about this last episode, the 3/5 compromise and the legislature. But for the first 100 years of this country, until the Civil War, Black Americans and its allies were just subjected to this system as the American flag waved, right? No longer was this just colonies and colonial times, but no, this was the United States of America, and black people were nothing more than property. And so you had Black Americans then and allies working against the system. You had slave rebellions, and they don't talk enough about the slave rebellions. After you Google House Bill 7 and House Bill 57, Google the Louisiana slave rebellions and learn about the history and impact of the Louisiana Purchase and the Haitian Revolution, which Haiti became the world's first Black republic during this time period. Prior to that, the continent of Africa was being colonized. It was being invaded, and none of those nations were respected as sovereign nations. In fact, if you go look up how the 55 nations of that African continent, go look up their Independence Day. Ours is way back in 1776. A lot of theirs is in like the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. South Africa, 1997. I was already born and had a favorite color and everything by 1997. And here, this continent of ours, our motherland, was still fighting to be recognized as legitimate nations on a global scale. But way back during this period that we're talking about between the American Revolution and the Civil War, Haiti emerged as the world's first Black republic. And it instigated slave rebellions throughout the South. That was exciting to learn about, how Black Americans never bowed down. The history that is taught and how it's taught, you would think that we were just always docile and subjugated people, but no, we fought against this, and we weren't alone. The infamous Underground Railroad, we had allies and religious groups and those who just also did not believe as Christian. We are a Christian nation. And so much of the arguments during this time period were how against God and against Jesus and Christianity this system was. And we talked about that last episode, how some of the justifications for keeping this system in place from its inception were convincing by science, convinced by religion, and convinced by economic reasons, and pushed hard through those narratives. But still, you got more organized and brutal plantations that started to sprout up during this time. Some of the more egregious actions against women and men, and it was just a terrible time period for our nation. Very embarrassing to have to teach. So I understand why they don't want to teach it in school, but it's our nation's history. You have more laws and more court rulings that kind of further entrenched this system of slavery. And that's the big issue I have with this country. We're almost done with the political hour. I got just a few more minutes, but that's the big issue that I have with this nation is those with power. Since our country's inception, they have always worked harder to make it harder and against freedom and justice for all rather than further it. Like, okay, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 was signed by the man on a dollar bill, George Washington, our first president. And it said that slaves could be captured if they run away, that no court proceeding was required to challenge, the legitimacy of the capture, just a testimony from the slave holder, and that interfering could get you fined or sued. Hence the need for something like an underground railroad, because it was obviously very illegal to help somebody get away. All the way up until Scott v. Sanford in the late 1850s, right? Where Justice Taney, who was a United States Attorney General and the Secretary of the Treasury at one point, powerful man, he explained the logic behind ruling against Dred Scott for his freedom. And it came back to blacks are property. We don't have the right to sue for freedom. And there's no such thing as freedom past the Mason-Dixon line, because property is property. And he clearly says, like, if I have, like, he didn't say water bottle because they didn't have water bottles back then. But if I have this water bottle, right, and I take it out into the front part of the studio, which is Urban Drinkery, make sure you come by and vibe with Urban Drinkery. But I leave it there and I come back here, it doesn't make it not my water bottle. And he was saying the same thing about enslaved people. If you go above the Mason-Dixon line, just because you went to a new geographical area doesn't mean you're free. Like, this is still, an opinion you can go read under Scott versus Sanford. But I say that to say, during this period that we're talking about, it was always against freedom and justice. And that is American history. It's our shared story. It's why bills like House Bill 7 cannot stand. We need to know our history. We need to teach our history unless it is going to be repeated. So that is the political hour. That's the little Black history segment we're going to do. There are 4 ways to listen. Download the app in the store, Apple or Google. Tell Alexa to play powerplugradio.com. Go to powerplugradio.com or subscribe to YouTube. There's always a banner at the bottom here encouraging folks to call in with commentary. So I encourage you to do that as well. But come to the happy hour hustle. It's every third Thursday. That's St. Patrick's Day this year, March 17th, and it'll be from 6 to 9. It's a free networking event. We got DJ, food, all kind of vendors come out. And it's just like a vibe right here at Urban Drinkery, the front side of the Power Plug studio. So, again, that is this March 17th, the third Thursday. I hope to see you there. But thank you for tuning in to the Political Hour. We'll be back next Tuesday. I'm Marielle Summers, and I'll see you then.
You're listening to Power Plug Radio, home of your throwback jams.